Welcome to The Cusp, a podcast that tries to give you the straight dope on what's actually happening with artificial intelligence, how jobs are changing, and what that means for education and workforce development. I'm Paul Fain, editor of the Job Newsletter and co-founder of WorkShift. Thanks for listening. Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I hope your summer is going well. For this episode, I spoke with three experts, all of whom bring both a broad lens and depth to the issues we cover on this show. The first segment features Alex Swartsel and Tiffany Hsieh from Jobs for the Future. Alex is managing director of the Insights practice at JFF Labs, where Tiffany is director of innovation programs in the incubation practice. Most importantly for us, Alex and Tiffany have led the launch of JFF's Center for Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Work. Make sure you stick around for the second interview with IBM's Lydia Logan. Lydia is the global lead for IBM's education and workforce development initiatives, a big role that really couldn't be more relevant to this topic. All three of our guests tackle questions about how educators should think about balancing the development of durable skills with the incorporation of AI-specific training. They also talked about where we are right now in the AI movement, with specific attention to community colleges and thoughts about the role big tech is and should be playing in making sure workers and learners get the help they need with AI. Let's get to the conversation. Hello, everybody. I'm in the virtual studio today with Alex Swartsel and Tiffany Hsieh from JFF's Center for Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Work. Tiffany and Alex, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks for having us.
So I like to sometimes start with, what about AI's tools, applications are you using? Are you excited about in your work, in your personal life? And I have to say, a little confession here. I ran Lydia Logan from IBM's transcript through Claude today and said, hey, what would be some good follow-up questions? I'm not using them, but they were very close to what I came up with, almost disturbingly so. But for you all, and we'll start with Alex, what applications are you most excited about these days?
The lens that JFF has taken on this space is probably not a surprise for everybody who knows us. It's how can AI accelerate equitable economic advancement and connection to quality jobs, especially for populations that have historically faced barriers to advancement, whether that's people without bachelor's degrees, people with records, too often people of color or women in some career spaces. And so what we find ourselves doing is digging into this space through the lens of those sets of questions, which means that in some cases, we are either looking at the broad LLM solutions or some of the more specialized solutions, not just for their broad utility, but asking some of these questions about how they can connect people to jobs or even to other opportunities to pursue economic mobility, like entrepreneurship, for example. And so we've been looking, and Tiffany can talk more about it in a second because she's done some more extensive research in this space, at some of the kinds of tools that are more focused around things like uncovering hidden skills, for instance, or looking into the way in which people can engage directly in creating AI tools themselves. But I think the big question for us, and this is something that I think remains an open question as we look at the whole universe of use cases, is what will be genuinely transformative as opposed to allowing us to iterate on the margins. I think that'll probably be a theme of our conversation today, because to your point, the Claudes and the ChatGPT of the world, I think we're all seeing this, can make us faster incrementally at some tasks. And that's going to be great. Productivity increases on the margins. And in some cases, in really more meaningful ways, will be exciting. But I think that the potential of the technology is bigger than that, especially when we think about its implications for the future of work and especially for economic mobility. So that's what I think we're not fully seeing yet, and we're excited to continue to explore. But Tiffany, what would you add to that?
Yeah, we've been, deep in some of this research around what are the use cases for AI and workforce development. And thanks, Paul, for giving us some early feedback on some of that. And to Alex's point, we're really seeing some of these incremental efficiency gains in what we have the imagination for now in the use cases that we're able to see and the solutions that we're seeing in the market today. And I think that's understandable, right? So first of all, those incremental efficiency gains are real, especially for resource-constrained organizations like nonprofits, workforce boards, et cetera. And they're going to have an impact on the way that they're going to be able to interact with job seekers, which is what they're wanting to spend more of their time on. There's a great quote by Benedict Evans that goes something along the lines of, in the course of technological adoption, we start with what we have the imagination for now and what we can do today. And then we'll move toward more kind of transformative applications like Alex was talking about in terms of equity. And so really we're focused on that potential. So Alex mentioned, articulation of skills. I think there's real potential there, right? Generative AI is good at taking unstructured data and putting it in structured forms. And if we can infer skills from folks who may not be able to articulate the skill sets that they have now, that can open up a whole world of economic opportunity and job opportunities for them. Adept ID is a great example of this. One example is that they've taken the skill sets from a cashier at Dunkin' Donuts and been able to find that they have a lot of transferable skills for, say, a pharmacy technician. That's going to really be transformative for those individuals. Other places that I'm excited about, social capital. How can we really facilitate human connection with generative AI? Help people form relationships in networks that they wouldn't have access to otherwise, give them some coaching on the norms around how to interact and find jobs in ways that can, again, open up opportunities. And then I think there's something around leveraging the power of disparate data sources to give people the right supports, feed them the right resources, connect them to the right training programs and jobs at the right time. Again, with that eye on transformation. And then Alex kind of touched on the everyone as a creator. I really like this solution. Folks like Anthill and PlayLab play in this space, which is opening up the world of who can be involved and included in creating AI solutions and finding those AI use cases so that more folks, employees across an organization can actually be included, contribute to inclusive development of these tools, and really solve for some of the challenges that we have around some of these tools.
Well, thanks for that. I really like the specific use cases you dropped in there. An adept ID is what I'm hearing about a lot. And actually, for folks listening, we're talking in mid-June. This probably will run in mid-July, which is tough when you're talking about AI. And I'm thinking about the transformational versus the just beginning to discover applications, kind of playing around with the tools. How far do you think we are in this movie? I had somebody say to me the other day, first of all, it's a movie that will never end. It's not like we're going to be like, okay, I've got AI figured out. We're good. We can stop. This is going to be a long process. But I think, 1% of the initial download, somebody told me the other day, like, just give me a sense of where you think we are, even glimpsing what's possible.
Yeah, gosh, that's such a good question. It's hard not to argue that we're in the first couple of innings, right? If not the very beginning of the first inning, which is crazy to say because of how fast the technology is accelerating. But I think there is a lot that argues for both rapid acceleration and development of the technology and also how much farther we have to go. What's been really striking to me, to get back to this theme of transformative use, is some of the domains where we're seeing that start to emerge and others where we're not. So it feels like whenever I'm showing up in AI-specific spaces where it's almost more about the core technology and less about the education and workforce components of it, the use cases that people are talking about that feel like the really dramatically transformative ones are things like healthcare, like drug discovery and development, the protein folding things. And that's not even generative AI, right? That's sort of old school AI that's more about novel ways of data analysis that is actually allowing us to develop new ideas, new products, and so forth. The other aspect of it that I think speaks to what Tiffany shared a minute ago about everyone a creator idea is the democratization of skill sets, to allow there to be some element of work that we do that everyone can do as a layperson, which could be coding, it could be website design, it could be all of these aspects that often are contained in what it means for someone to be an entrepreneur, for example, which is, again, exciting for us from an economic mobility perspective. I think because of the dynamic that Tiffany cited in that quote, that we're starting with what we know and can imagine today, we're necessarily, I think, going to end up taking some of these baby steps more so than we are great leaps, because everybody is still getting to know the technology. Even in some of the enterprise use cases that we hear about, where there are companies that have tremendous resources to begin to build out and test use cases, they're both moving very fast and very slowly at the same time. They're moving fast in terms of rapid testing and iteration, but they're moving slowly in terms of a degree of caution about what use cases they're testing. They're testing something internal behind closed doors, not something that's customer facing yet, because they're concerned about the risk, understandably. And so there are a lot of, I think, countervailing pressures in this space that will, in some cases, keep things moving, in some way iteratively, even as the technology moves so fast. But what's fascinating to me actually is how this question of creators starts to come into it, because this technology is not just a B2B technology, it's B2B and B2C at the same time. And so the more that you have individuals, whether on their own or as employees, engaged in BYO AI, which we're seeing from some of the research is taking hold more and more, Paul, you've done it yourself, we've all done it. You'll start to get innovation bubbling from the ground up, which could potentially, if the organizations where people are seated are paying attention, could lead to some really exciting use cases that might be transformative down the road. So I think there's a mix of factors that are going to influence how this develops that in some cases might be surprising in terms of the speed. We know the technology is going to keep moving at the speed of light. And so then the question just becomes, how are we empowering ourselves to use it?
Great point, Tiffany. Anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's the advancement of the technology itself and then the advancement of our use of the technology, right? So when it comes to the technology itself, I think we're certainly at the beginning stages. If you think about it, maybe with the analogy of computers, mainframe computers existed for a long time before we started moving into the PC era, the personal computer eras. I think we're sort of at that point with the democratization of AI through generative AI. And so it's only going to continue to start moving towards smartphones and et cetera, et cetera. And in terms of how we're using it, we did a lot of interviews with stakeholders across the ecosystem for this use cases research. And I think a lot of folks are still, again, in that kind of beginning stages of beginning to imagine the ways in which we can use it. We heard a lot, for example, around, resumes and cover letters, or, hey, I can use this to write grant applications. That's great. There are some efficiency gains there, but that doesn't necessarily get us to those transformative use cases.
Absolutely. But, before we get to the potential for transformational, you want to make sure that folks have some foundational understanding, and that includes leaders. I think it was this week that Coursera put out a course on AI literacy for university leadership, and we're seeing a ton of these. Lydia talked about some of the free tools from IBM. Google has some really good ones. I just wonder for you all, what's most important about that kind of foundational literacy? What does that mean to you? And do you think that it can be done pretty easily? Because we've had other folks on this show who say, even 12 minutes here and there, you can make a lot of progress in understanding what's possible.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that there are a few pieces to this when we think about AI literacy. So I think the easier pieces are, what is it at a fundamental level? How does it work from a basic understanding? I don't think you need to get too technical about it, but that helps you then also understand the limitations and the biases baked into the systems to make you a more responsible user of the technology and understand how to put it into use in your day-to-day. But I think it's that second piece around how do you then use it in the flow of work in context of what you're doing that takes possibly a little bit more experimentation, a little bit more time. And you can't really go wrong on the kind of 101 content side of, you mentioned the IBMs, the Coursera's of the world. And I think it's where we start to get into experimentation and use, where we need some pieces that are more contextual and more specific. So I'll give an example. Last year at our all staff for Jobs for the Future, Alex and I facilitated a session for our staff members to really just kind of play around with the technology, but do it in a way that was contextual. So using actual projects and actual tasks that we may be working on, and then applying, the generative AI tools that we use to solve for some of those problems. So for example, drafting interview protocols, drafting outlines for our blog posts, analyzing labor market data. So all of that is really in the flow of our work and helps then set people up to use the technology more responsibly as well as more creatively.
I really like the AI in the flow of work context, hey, this might be something I could play around with is not that, being a little more systematic about how to apply it. I think we need more help. At least I could use more help. Alex, anything you want to add on that?
Just the one point that I think we're starting to see come up, especially thinking about industry or role specific use cases of AI, which obviously is starting to unfold with enterprise adoption. I think we'll see more and more of. One thing that we've wondered about is whether or not we'll start to see, training providers, employers, or others say, here's this particular application of AI or some point solution of AI. And really all you need to know is that, if you're a medical assistant and there is an application of AI that's particular to your role, we'll train you on that and call it done. And I think part of what Tiffany's been encouraging here in her response a second ago is there is some critical body of knowledge that we need to build in people around how the technology itself works as a general purpose technology, because it is still growing and emerging over time. I think the more that people are equipped to understand some of these fundamentals, and the today version of that is sometimes it hallucinates, it has, deeply fundamentally baked in bias, right? All of these things that will allow people to bring a more critical lens as they're applying it. And while that can potentially take more time, at the least it's a two-part training. Here's the basic knowledge, and then here's the tool-specific knowledge rather than a one-part training. We think that's part of what will equip workers and learners to be able to leverage this technology in a variety of ways as they advance through their career, which is, of course, our interest.
And as the technology changes, too, we weren't training people specifically as the internet came online on, oh, here's how you use AOL versus here's how you use Hotmail. We're kind of understanding how to use that in the flow of work generally and understanding the technology at a more fundamental level. Same with what we're hoping is going to be coming in the future for, flow of work training.
Yeah, I think a lot about like the early days of search and how informal the understanding of how to get the most out of that was. Friends I knew who had gone to Stanford had better uses of Google than I had. And, it worries me again about kind of how people kind of systematically pick up some of these skills. But I also really love your framing this, the general purpose versus the industry specific. I would love to see some journalism industry specific tools. That would be great. And I'm assuming we will soon, if they may already exist. One of our previous guests, Alex Catran, when we talked about what we know about how jobs are changing, he said this is what keeps him up at night. Tiffany, you and I have talked about this. It's very, very hard to know anything at this point. And I think about, folks at, resource constrained schools and community colleges trying to figure out that mix of the durable skills versus tech specific training that could change tomorrow. What are your thoughts on this really difficult question and how to help people in this moment? Alex, do you want to start on that?
Yeah, I think doubling down on durable skills is the beginning, middle, and end of our thinking about this so far. Just our own research released last November is showing that those are going to be the skills that are sustained even as AI comes to the forefront and can create opportunities for AI to unlock those skills in new ways, which is really exciting. And so the more that we can help prepare people at all levels of our education and workforce systems to leverage those kinds of skills, especially as the half-life of technical skills is constantly shortening, even as AI skills themselves will continue to evolve as the technology changes, that's going to be essential. Some other things that we're starting to see are the ability to pull cross-functional knowledge together, people who can tap into some combination of AI and cybersecurity expertise or AI and data analysis. Even, we were talking to a university that's digging into AI in agriculture. People who are able to flex between some of these different domains to build domain knowledge and the critical thinking skills around how you leverage domain knowledge, often in combination with AI, is going to be really critical, as well as just a baseline level of adaptability, right? Our friends at LinkedIn have talked about adaptability as the top emerging skill set of the moment and really a lasting skill of the future, because as we continue to move through different jobs and careers, our ability to come up to speed quickly, understand what matters in that context, how we can unlock what's possible with some of these tools is going to be critical. And that's a tricky thing, I think, for a lot of our systems to navigate when they've been established around, a core body of knowledge or a core body of technical skills. So I think there's a lot of, what's old is new again in terms of workforce development and great orientation towards post-secondary education and training. Stay closely in touch with employers in the industry, in your region, allowing for rapid cycle feedback, even more rapid than before, creating opportunities for project-based learning for people to try these skills on, in real life, which we're already hearing students asking for, will create more opportunities for people to both learn and demonstrate these skills even more quickly as jobs evolve, but also to be able to be more imaginative with the technology itself.
You make a very convincing case on several fronts, but this isn't entirely new. it just in some ways ups the urgency, like for the signals from the employer. I also really like the AI interdisciplinarity piece. Again, something that feels like it's obvious and it's coming, but I haven't seen that much. Tiffany, anything you want to add there?
I would echo what you said. These aren't new conversations. And in fact, I think this leans into what schools and colleges are really built to do and can be good at, teaching people how to learn, how to think critically, how to build that general domain knowledge that then allows them to interact with new technologies and adapt. When I was a teacher, we were having conversations about grit and adaptability, and here we are again. So I think we can really lean into the strengths of the education and higher education institutions.
So thinking about the most current AI infused skills training, when higher ed tries to create professional certificates, they don't always work. When I'm thinking about tech in particular, it's weird for me. I feel like I'm being a booster for big tech, which doesn't need my help. But I generally think it's a good idea to think about some of the tools from the Googles and the IBMs as being helpful to what you're doing. Maybe not. Maybe in some cases go with their micro credentials versus your own. Thoughts on that, or thoughts about how colleges and K-12 schools should be working or paying attention to what's coming out from some of the big companies right now? It's not easy to do. Any thoughts there?
I mean, I've been very encouraged by the orientation of a lot of the tech companies. Obviously, talked with Lydia and IBM, Google, Intel has done a lot of work at the community college level here that orients not just towards here's your career path and your credentials if you want to enter a career building AI, but here's how you can apply this more broadly in any career. LinkedIn and LinkedIn Learning is doing a lot of the same things. So I think it's starting to come out. And, the breadth of reach of these technology companies mean that when they create those offerings, often they are very widely available, either through their own platforms or through the Coursera's of the world, as we were talking about earlier. And as the builders of this technology and the consumers of it in a lot of ways, they come with a great deal of credibility that I think that the space pays attention to, rightly so. Whether, for its own purposes or whether a smaller company, for instance, is interested in hiring somebody who has some degree of expertise or knowledge about Google's version of AI or how IBM thinks about AI, for example. And so I've been really encouraged by the steps that the companies are taking as it relates to broad brush workforce development. And I would just say, keep it up and keep thinking about all of the aspects of this education and workforce ecosystem. I think they have figured out that community colleges are a linchpin of the system, and that's really encouraging. They're figuring out what it looks like to tap into small businesses as an economic engine who employ millions more people than they do across the country, and who, I think are at a very different place when it comes to AI adoption. That's something that we're thinking about a great deal. What does it look like to support small businesses who are experimenting with AI in some ways or trying to figure out how jobs will change? How do we support them in talent practices that can uplift people, for example? So I think just the more that the companies can continue this work, share what they know, help this ecosystem see around corners, even when the ecosystem is not necessarily itself, as Tiffany said earlier, well-positioned to be early adopters of the technology because of cost barriers or capacity or whatever it looks like. I think the more we can be prepared collectively, the better we are as a society, and certainly the better positioned workers and learners will be.
Quick follow-up before I bring Tiffany here. And this is a tough one, honestly. I'm not talking about elite institutions and their PhD programs here. I'm talking about community colleges trying to do AI-specific credentialing, certificates, degree programs. Several of them are moving forward, and I can see the value in that. I also see risks. Thoughts about how to approach that at this moment when we're still figuring out what those skills will be versus the durable skills?
Yeah, it's a really important question. And I think that the colleges that are moving forward, especially the ones that are moving fastest, are doing so in conversation with industry, which is helpful, because if you're going to do it, best to do it in conversation with industry. And I do think many of them are building out the full stack of this, right? Including broad-based proverbial AI for workforce, in addition to more specialized AI paths. That not putting all of their chips on the possibility of training, millions and millions of the next generation of AI engineers, notwithstanding the fact that, it seems as though demand for AI engineers is going nowhere but up. I think that the inherent flexibility that's being built into that model, where they're able to offer training that's broadly applicable to people who are, as we've seen in some of these instances, small business owners that are trying to figure out how to use AI in small businesses, or, in a digital marketing career track or something else. I think that if the colleges are able to do a little bit of that both and, they will insulate themselves from, if for whatever reason something happens in AI development and demand for AI engineers drops off a cliff. I would be surprised if that happened. But, so many of these community colleges are in spaces where, there may not necessarily be a hotbed of AI development and building, at least outside the coasts. But there could potentially be a ton of activity around AI use and implementation in a whole variety of industries, whether it's healthcare, whether it's, human services, finance, other kinds of spaces. That broad-based knowledge that is certainly specific to AI, but also can touch some of the other domains that we were talking about earlier, that still feels like the right strategy to me. And I think the colleges that we've seen are starting to pursue that strategy. I mean, I think they would say they're figuring it out themselves, and it's been really, really fun to watch their trajectory. But this is part of why I think having more of these kinds of conversations, creating more of an iterative feedback loop between industry and the colleges is going to be a really essential part of the strategy.
Hard to argue with that. I mean, thank you for indulging that question. But yeah, I think if you're developing AI specific skills and credentials, working with industry is going to be huge. Tiffany, a lot of threads there on the industry partnership front. Anything that you want to add?
Yeah, what I would just call out is that there is an equity component to this, right? So the populations that community colleges and other community-based organizations serve that are partnering with the Googles, the Intels, the IBMs of the world, they serve a different population who are typically left behind in periods of technological advancement. So your Carnegie Mellons are going to continue to build AI degrees and skills. And so we don't want those folks who are served by community colleges to be left behind, to exacerbate the digital divide that already exists. And so I think that case for them to continue on this path, regardless of the fact that technologies may change as it relates to AI, hopefully they, being the community colleges, can continue being adaptable to whatever industry is kind of telling them in those partnerships and conversations. But I think we would just really want to make sure that we're focused on, at JFF, the populations that we call our North Star populations and their advancement.
I'm with you on that. The show is definitely not about the graduates of elite PhD programs who are probably going to be okay. For our last question, you started, Alex, talking about kind of the exciting transformative potential, particularly around, barriers that lower income learners and workers face. You can talk to two different experts from MIT about the impacts of this technology on the middle class and get two different answers. You can even talk to one and get two different answers. And there are good reasons for that. But I want to get a sense of where do you fall in the worried, excited continuum, particularly around the kind of equity and economic mobility pieces that this technology might drive?
Can I say both? I mean, I think I'm an optimist, because I have to be, because this technology is here. We know it's not going away. And because it is here, it represents a tremendous opportunity if we use it in the right way. And that's the hurdle. One of the things that was striking to me about some of the research that we've seen, even just recently come out of MIT, is this question about a choice point for us. And it's doubling back to the very beginning of this conversation, whether we're using AI to make incremental productivity gains on the margins, which potentially has bigger risks for workforce, especially, if we hit a period of downturn again, versus where we can tap into AI to actually create new forms of work in ways that create value for companies and create value for society. The more that we have created opportunities for past technology to develop new forms of work that then can be rich and fulfilling for humans, create value for society, that has driven business value in the long term and has helped create more opportunities for more people, often in better jobs. That's the trajectory that we want to see. And so I think that's where you start to see us, pushing on transformative use cases. And I think, especially just to pick up on some other themes from this conversation, putting the technology in the hands of populations that all too often don't have easiest access to this technology, who will, we see time and time again, see use cases, identify applications for the technology, ways to engage their communities and other communities who may historically be underserved in the development and use of that technology. that will create use cases that we've never even imagined. And the more that we create systems and structures or open up systems and structures to allow that kind of innovation to happen, I think that's where we can all start to get really optimistic. And in the meantime, making sure that we are very thoughtful about the potential impacts of transformation that could yield outcomes that we like less, whether that is job loss, whether it's really disruptive job transformation. I am encouraged by the fact that as we, hear companies talking about this, that universally it seems like the message, especially at the enterprise level, is we want to augment humans. We want to create opportunities for people to do work that only humans can do. And that's exactly what we want to see. And so I think now the question is, how can we continue to incentivize movement in that direction? And how can we leverage the technology in a way that opens up new avenues for value creation in addition to just squeezing incremental gains, as awesome as they may be, out of existing use cases that we can imagine today?
Your point about the kind of the groundswell of grassroots use cases, I feel like in the last month, the conversations I have with community colleges are way more, wow, our students and faculty members are doing all these super cool things we never would have thought of, and that's just going to increase. Tiffany, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I would say that, in addition to the use cases that are transformative, hopefully for the ecosystem as a whole, what's interesting about this moment is I think it's created more urgency around some of the best practices that we've been talking about for a long time. So earlier we were talking about, the project-based learning, durable skills, which has been a conversation. But I think it's pushing us as an ecosystem to think about how do we actually put that into practice in a way that's more real. And same with skill-based hiring, systems of lifelong learning. I'm excited for some of those conversations to turn from conversations to action in a way that is going to benefit individuals who are typically overlooked in these times of change.
Tiffany Hsieh, Alex Swartsel from JFF Center for Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Work. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Paul. It was great to be
So
here.
much, Paul.
We'll definitely be following the center's work and would love to have you back some point. I appreciated how Alex and Tiffany differentiated between the iterative and the transformative with this technology. And I have to say, this is the first time I heard the term BYO AI, which is about using AI tools as part of your daily workflow. All right, here's Lydia Logan. I'm here with Lydia Logan. Lydia, how are you?
I'm doing well, Paul. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks very much for speaking with me. We got a bunch of topics to tackle here, but I wanted to start by getting a sense of the level of urgency you're feeling about adjusting to an AI-infused world and how bullish you are that educators should be moving now.
Very bullish. I think educators should lean in, and I'll tell you why. What is happening is we're seeing both shifts in the workforce, in the skills that people are expected to have. We know that will continue to change with the advent of any new technology by the time it hits the workforce, right? Think about when we all started using the internet, when we started using email. I know that might date myself a little bit, but we had explosions of new skills that we needed in order to keep pace with the workforce. And that's happening now. And so what we need to make sure we're doing with our educators is to get them the skills that they need in order to apply generative AI in classroom settings, inside their institutions. If you're an administrator, right, what does this look like for you? So very bullish. Changes are not just coming, they're here.
I like that you brought up, I remember email as well, dating myself too. I mean, in a relative sense, is this moment bigger than the internet? Is it on the level with the internet?
I think it could be on the level of the internet. I do, right? I think this is going to change. It is changing the skills we need for work, what we do on a daily basis, how we get it done, how we change around the structure of our day. And what do I mean by that? What I really mean is we spend a lot of time, all of us, doing things that are administrative, doing some things that are repetitive, that are automatable. And with AI, we now have the ability to automate those things that are taking up our time when we really could be leaning into higher order kinds of tasks, communicating, collaborating with our peers, doing our strategic planning, thinking about how we can make improvements. Those are things that only we can do. We can get suggestions. We can feed in prompts to a generative AI tool of our choice and get some suggestions, but the doing of it is something humans have to do. And deciding which recommendations we take, again, humans need to do. And we're going to need to involve other people in moving these kinds of things forward. So if you're going to gain efficiencies by using generative AI, then what are you doing with the time you just got back? How are you using it? And what skills do you need to use that time better? Those are the durable skills: communication, collaboration, presentation, project management. So what we're seeing is you need AI skills, right? Skills using generative AI well, prompt writing, those kinds of things, coding for non-coders, how to use generative AI to create code to help you do things. And then all of the things that people thought were going to be less important because they thought the new technology was going to mean everything you needed to know how to do with technical. And we're finding that's not actually true. If you look at the Reskilling Revolution report from the World Economic Forum, they're talking a lot about leaning into the durable skill.
If you're an educator, I could forgive you for feeling a bit of whiplash there. It is, as you say, a different world than we thought it might be a few years back. In this moment, how do you begin incorporating changes to a curriculum based on the tasks that are getting automated? Like, I think a lot of those tasks are things that folks did early in their career.
Right. So there's a lot of talk now about the half-life of skills and how it's getting shorter. Half-life of skills, half-life of degrees. What do you need to do in order to keep current? That's why I started out the conversation by saying, lean in, because it's only going to keep changing. You don't have to necessarily be a first mover or first adopter, but you do need to educate yourself, understand, dip your toe in the water, do it in a personal setting, use one of the generative AI tools and create a playlist for yourself. Learn to enter some successive prompts in a low stakes way so that you can get comfortable with it. And then think about how you would use it in an academic setting, in a classroom. How can you do some creative things with the content? How can you do things to help yourself gain efficiencies? We all know that educators are swamped. And if you can find ways to either buy yourself time so that you're spending more time with students, again, getting back to higher order activities, the most important thing you can do is to be working with your students and automate some of the things that it takes you to do to prepare for the follow-up. So if you can automate some of those things, how do you lean in for your students with your students? And that's at any level, right? That's in K-12, that's in higher ed, that's in our, post-secondary institutions, whether you're in a degree or non-degree pathway. Think about how you're doing it. The other side of this is, your students are using it. I feel like the last 2 years have been a debate about, should we allow students to use generative AI to create first drafts and things like that? I think that ship has sailed.
Yeah.
They are going to do it. So understand how you think differently, right? If they're going to use a generative AI tool to create a first draft, work with them then on what does it mean to not just take and submit the first draft? How do you either check facts or check quality or go in for the next better version of the draft? Because that's what you're preparing for your first job is generally about, right? How do you get the information, put it together in a compelling way, refine it? So if you can accelerate that process, you're just approaching things a little bit differently in your classroom setting, but it doesn't mean don't use the tool, right? We had that debate a long time ago about should math students be allowed to use a calculator. You still need to understand the mathematical concepts and you need to be able to defend them. I'd say it's the same thing now. You can use the new technology, but you need to understand how to use it well. You need to be able to defend the viewpoint you're putting forward as a student to your professor. So maybe there are more presentations students have to give. Maybe it's more of a discussion format. Maybe you need to flip the interaction style. They've got to be able to defend what they put forward, not just write the draft and submit it.
Well, it's good advice, and a recurring theme on this young show of really playing around with the tools yourself at all levels, because it helps. There's surprises, I think, for all of us in how you can use these things. But I do wonder, if you're an educator trying to incorporate this very different way of thinking, where do you turn for help? A previous guest on this show, Katie Knight, praised IBM for its fluency tools with AI. We didn't tell her to say that either, but you obviously are doing that. But any other good advice for folks who feel a little overwhelmed by this?
Absolutely. We do have our free program, skillsbuild.org. You can go and create an account and start learning for free. It's IBM Signature Education Program. It's global. We have, foundation free courses on, introduction to AI, and you can sign up and take those. We want people to have access in a way that's approachable. We want to make sure that it's quality content, and we want to make sure that we are meeting people where they are, and then they can level up all the way up to, professional IBM, product certification at the professional level. But everyone needs to be able to start somewhere, and we are doing our best to bring our technology and our talent in the form of our volunteers out to people in multiple languages. Skills Build is in up to 20 languages. We're offered in hundreds of countries around the world, and up to 1,000 different learning experiences, not all in AI, but AI, cyber, a bunch of technology topics, as well as those durable skills, professional skills, because as I said before, it's those two things together that you need in the workplace, and we're acknowledging that and offering it for free on Skillsbuild.
Just hearing the scope of what you're seeing in education, I really do think gives you a lens into how education is dealing with this moment that few have. And I want to go back to what you said about, banning it in the classroom discussion from 6 months ago. How much have we come past that? I feel like I'm seeing encouraging signs, at the aggregate level of folks really trying to get their arms around this in a proactive way. But are you optimistic? Are people embracing this the way they should be?
We have partners working with us. We're working with 20 HBCUs, which we started cybersecurity leadership centers. And almost all of them are now working with us on providing entry-level AI skills to their students who are in college, because they know that they're going to need it, and they're continuing to work with us on that. We are working with organizations like Digital Promise and high school students. Again, we started with them in cyber, and now we're adding AI. So there are organizations that are leaning in and helping to do that in classrooms and providing those bright lights, after years of working with K-12 educators and education systems. People often need to see the example that works and understand that it's possible before they're willing to follow. And that's okay. You don't have to be the first mover, but you can know that it is working and it is possible, and you've got to start somewhere. We need to sort of demystify, lower the pressure around the fear mongering of AI is going to take over everything, and, it's going to replace all jobs. Jobs will shift. New jobs will be created. New ways of doing things are going to emerge. We're still at the beginning. I don't think we know, we don't know everything. I'm on the Corporate Innovation Council with Jobs for the Future, and I was talking to Kat Ward, who runs that program. And she said, is this a moment or a movement? And I said, it's a movement, but we're at the moment at the beginning of the movement. We still need a lot of the infrastructure. We need to make sure people understand where cybersecurity and AI come together. You need to understand that, if you're using one of these generative AI models, you are not just a user, you're also a trainer. You're helping it to learn. So anything you're feeding into it, it's taking that data, it's holding it, it's using it, it's aggregating it, it's analyzing it. You're giving it your social security number, your home address, your, bank account information. Those are the kinds of things where you want to be really careful.
Well, let me push into that for a second. I think about that as well. I mean, when you're using Google, you are part of the process, I know. I think we've all kind of learned that, but I do wonder, like, fluency with how to use these frontier models is something. Does IBM help there? Can it help?
Absolutely. Not only do we offer some of that in our courses, but we have volunteers who provide lectures and workshops. We also can put together, custom discussion groups that are off the record for administrators, for system leaders. We want to make sure that we're a good partner and that we can share the expertise that we have with the people who need it. And so we have those conversations with groups through the US Chamber of Commerce, and there's some larger groups with the Business Roundtable. But I think it's, raise your hand. We're here to help you as a partner. And I think that's where we're often ahead of other sectors. And we're happy to be that trusted partner, that trusted friend who can help you think through what are the frameworks that you should be considering if you're thinking about how to apply it in the setting of your institution or your system.
Well, I really like that. And also to push into your intermediary organizations that can help, like you said, the Chamber or JFF. I want to change gears here a little bit, thinking again, if I'm an educator who's preparing folks for entry-level jobs, and when you see the potential for those jobs to change or frankly be eliminated, investment banking, again, I'm not trying to get into the fear mongering, but there are some entry-level roles that are going to be very different, if not completely different, in the sense that the preparation for folks in those roles will change dramatically. And I love what you said there, like, we're just at the beginning. Like, I think a lot of people come at this like, I'm going to adjust for AI and then I'm done, right? How do you maintain a process of iteration around a moving target like AI and jobs?
Well, part of it is making sure that your employees are getting the skills they need in order to keep up. Because if your employees are keeping up, your business is keeping up. So it's a good investment. So that's one. And jobs will shift and change. And we see that every time we have new technology, that hits. It generally starts with industry or it starts with the government. Again, if you look at the internet, it started out with the military and then it went to industry and then it got down to individual users and homes. So it changed work, and then it changed society, it changed everyday life. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing. We had industry level uses of AI and generative AI, and then it became something that has made its way into the hands of individuals. And now we're trying to figure out what does that mean and how do we do it responsibly and ethically? And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us to understand, like I was saying before, where does your responsibility of understanding what happens to your data? When do you use it? When do you not use it, right? Do you know where it's going? Do you know what's going to be used? Do you know what you've provided permission for yourself and for your kids if you have them? Which is why it's important in school settings to think about how it's being used in the classroom. What are your policies around new technologies? What's your CTO thinking about, your CIO? A lot of it's free, so it isn't even necessarily a question about costs, but it may be more around educator training coaches or thinking through these things, with experts. But again, keep up. So don't let it overwhelm you and don't let it stop you. Educate yourself and just make sure you take the first step.
Well, that's really good advice. I'm thinking about all the credentials that you all are producing with Skills Build. And, how AI fluency, I'm guessing, is increasing in big part of those learning pathways. Is that something that we should be seeing across all of post-secondary education where, at some degree, you're incorporating that like baseline fluency in what you're doing?
I think so. It absolutely should. In higher ed, community colleges are often the first movers. For years, when I worked at the US Chamber of Commerce and we would see signs of things, trends in, a shortage in healthcare professionals and needing to develop new pathways in nursing in order to accommodate the aging baby boomers, community colleges leaned in.
Yep.
They leaned in with healthcare systems. They figured out ways to get large numbers of people trained with new skills quickly in ways that they could apply for jobs that were available now. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing some really innovative institutions doing that exact same thing. I hope that becomes something that we see across the board. But yes, because these are the new basic skills.
Yep. Well said. To that end, though, I totally hear you. And we're seeing community colleges that are at the leading edge here trying to create not just tools embedded in other programs, but credentials that can help folks get jobs in AI related fields. And you know this, there's always the worry that, a Miami-Dade or another community college will take this leap and their graduates will be passed up for four-year graduates. Thoughts about how to proceed with
Sure.
the right boldness versus caution?
This is where skills first hiring and skills training come together, right? If you have the right skills and you have the skills for today that are in demand, you're more likely to get the job. So what some people have been saying is AI won't take your job, but someone who has skills with AI will take your job. So if you think about it that way, that's where I think this is going. We need to make sure that getting those generative AI skills, whether you get them on Skills Builder or somewhere else, understanding how to use them, AI fluency, that you're starting to move in that direction as an individual or as an institution. As employers, IBM's viewpoint is our pathway programs don't cut off the decision of the individual for their next step. So if you come to IBM through an apprenticeship program, we've worked with ACE. We've got 30 plus apprenticeship job roles that are registered with the Department of Labor. Almost all of them come with recommended post-secondary credits so that if you choose to go back to college, those apprenticeships have a credit hour value for you. We're moving in the same direction for a lot of what we're doing with Skills Build and our other programs. Not a straight path from high school to college to work, and then you just work until you retire. Those days are over. People go to work, they go back to school, they could do a job training program, they learn on the job. We need to allow people to demonstrate what they know and are able to do with digital credentials and things that are beyond just diplomas. And so acknowledging that not everyone is gaining skills in the same way that people did, our parents and our grandparents. We have to have a much more flexible system that allows people to gain those credentials, share them easily. That's the system that's missing.
Absolutely. And, when I think about that connection between employment and education in this less linear world, I do wonder, thinking about the big shifts to entry-level work that we're likely to see in coming years, if your vision is correct there, and I definitely think it is, how does that information get to educators? I think big companies, they have a better sense of what's happening to their workforce sometimes than what they're sharing publicly. I just wonder, how soon do you think we'll get to see tangible results of those shifts in ways that can help inform education? Because it feels like big companies like IBM can help drive that information flow maybe more than smaller employers.
I think we can, but I also would say we have a vast ecosystem of partners, small, medium, and large. And so some of what we do because we're doing it for the ecosystem. We're not just doing it for IBM. It's good for business, it's good for society, and it's good for individual. People who gain these new skills may not be coming directly to IBM, but they may be going to work for, one of our suppliers, or they may be going to work for one of our partner companies. So it makes sense for all of us to be engaged and for all of us to participate because it lifts all boats. And then, how will people find out? They find out through people like you, Paul. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that we are reaching people where they are and making sure they know what's available. I also like to say, don't pay for something that you can get at high quality for free. I'll say it again. That's why we're offering Skills Build. You can get these new skills in a lot of places, but you don't necessarily have to pay a lot of money to make sure you're getting started.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you indulging these very broad questions. And I thank you and IBM for helping us make sense of this very interesting moment. And I hope we can keep in touch as it all shapes up over the next couple of years.
Absolutely. I would love to come back and talk to you some more. Every 30 days or so, there's a new development, a new release. So happy to come back and talk some more soon.
Indeed. Thanks so much, Lydia.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning into The Cusp. We're available wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe. You can visit us at thecusp.ai. The launch of this podcast was made possible by the collective philanthropic support of the Walmart Foundation, GitLab Foundation, Cognizant, and the Cape Work Center. Thanks to our supporters and to you all for listening. Catch you next time.